afternoon, everyone. Oh my gosh, where do I start? First of all, of course,
She was
first and
down a
foremost,
set. She was down a break. And by the time the rain finally stopped falling on Washington, D.C., nobody outside her own team believed Alexandra Eala had a real shot at the trophy. Then something shifted. In less than an hour of actual tennis, the 21-year-old from the Philippines went from a losing position to a champion. And in doing so, she rewrote the record books for her entire nation. This is the story of how a rain delay, a t-shirt with a message about patience, and a three-set comeback turned into the biggest moment women's tennis has seen from Southeast Asia in years. Let's set the scene. The DC Open, one of the marquee summer tune-up events before the US Open, had already been a coming-out party for Eala all week. She'd arrived without a WTA final to her name, a talented but still largely unproven 20-something trying to find her footing at the top level. By the end of the tournament, she'd beaten an Olympic gold medalist, a former world number one, a top 3 seed, and the defending champion for separate giant killings in a single week, on her way to a final nobody had predicted. Her opponent in that final was Jessica Pegula, the American world number 1 seed, playing in front of a home crowd on home soil. On paper, it looked like the kind of match where the crowd noise alone should have carried Pegula through. Instead, something unusual happened. The stands were awash in Philippine flags. Chants for Eala consistently drowned out the cheers for the American star. Pegula, to her credit, later admitted the atmosphere was intense to play against, even as she said she respected how electric it was. But then the weather intervened. Heavy rain rolled into the D.C. area right as the final was getting underway, and what should have been a straightforward 2-hour title match turned into a nearly 24-hour ordeal spread across 2 separate days. Pegula took the opening set comfortably, 6-4. Eala had just broken back to go up 2-1 in the second set when officials made the call. The match was suspended, with players and fans sent home to wait out the storm. Picture that for a moment. You're 21 years old, playing in the biggest match of your career. You're already down a set, and now you have to sit with that feeling overnight, not knowing when, or if you'll get to finish what you started. That's the kind of pause that can break a player's momentum entirely. For Eala, it seems to have done the opposite. When the match resumed the next day, Pegula opened with a 10-service game to level things at 2 games apiece. But from there, the entire complexion of the contest changed. Eala's shots started landing deeper. Her serve got sharper. Pegula later described it almost like playing 2 completely different opponents across 2 completely different days, admitting that whatever rhythm she'd found on day 1 simply wasn't there when play resumed. Eala broke Pegula's serve in the 10th game of the second set to level the match at a set apiece, forcing a decisive third. And that's when the rout truly began. From that point forward, Eala won every single game she needed. She swept through the final set, dropping almost nothing along the way, and closed out the biggest win of her life by taking the last 8 games of the match in a row. When the final point landed, Eala didn't leap or pump her fist. She sank straight to the court, hands over her face, visibly overwhelmed. Tears came before she even stood back up. Only after composing herself did she walk to the net, embrace Pegula, and let out the kind of scream that comes from years of built-up pressure finally breaking free. Afterward, she admitted she barely remembered the closing stretch. In her words, the nerves were so overwhelming that she essentially blacked out, and everything about the moment simply rushed over her all at once. Here's what makes this win even more remarkable. It wasn't Eala's first shot at a title. A year earlier in Eastbourne, England, she'd reached her first WTA final and held 4 separate championship points for chances to close it out, and let every single one slip away. That kind of near miss can follow a player for years, a mental scar that shows up in the biggest moments. Instead, Eala used it as fuel. She called this win pure happiness, a payoff for a heartbreak she'd carried for a full season. There's a symbolic detail that made headlines of its own. Earlier in the tournament, Eala had been photographed wearing a Nike shirt printed with a Filipino, saying that roughly translates to the idea that once something takes root, it cannot be stopped. Nobody could have scripted a more fitting line for what was about to unfold. A tournament that started with modest expectations turned, by its final day, into the exact kind of unstoppable growth that phrase was describing. The historical weight of the moment is hard to overstate. No Filipina had ever won a singles title on the WTA Tour before this. Eala didn't just win a tournament, she opened a door that had never been open for players from her country, and there's a neat symmetry to where it happened. This very tournament in Washington was the site of Pegula's own first WTA title back in 2019. In beating her, Eala effectively picked up the torch on the exact same stage where her opponent once lit hers. Pegula, for her part, didn't sound bitter in defeat. If anything, she sounded impressed. She spoke about how gracefully Eala has carried the growing wave of attention and expectation that's followed her everywhere week after week, and called it a real sign of maturity, both as a competitor and as a person. With her win, Eala is projected to crack the top 20 in the world rankings for the first time in her career. Both players wasted no time looking ahead. They're both heading straight to Toronto for the next big hardcourt event ahead of the US Open, with Pegula seeded third and Eala arriving as the 25th seed, but now carrying an entirely different level of belief. Even boxing royalty took notice. Manny Pacquiao posted his congratulations publicly, praising the fighting spirit behind her comeback and welcoming her as the country's newest champion. Later that same day, in the men's final, third-seeded Taylor Fritz needed 5 championship points before finally closing out his own title, describing the finish less as a celebration and more as pure relief after finally getting the job done. But the story of the week belonged to Eala, a rain delay, a 4-time championship point heartbreak from a year earlier, and a T-shirt slogan that turned out to be prophetic, all colliding into one unforgettable breakthrough for Philippine tennis.